Hey, hey, Timmy Treagle, this is for you.
Hang on, it's very blurry. Fucking hit me.
The Getting to Know You podcast has gone international this week. I have a contact I met on Facebook named Alex Rains. He is from Australia. I'm sure his upbringing was far different from mine, and I want to know more about it. Alex, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem, Tim. Thanks for having us.
Well, you've seen this show before. I think you said you've watched them all, so I do appreciate that. Tell me, where'd you? How was it like growing up out there? Where were you born?
I was born in Townsville, which is my closest city. Lived in town for only a short period of time, about a year, and then excuse me,
Oh, dinner!
Sorry, I have dogs too.
Oh,
Did you not? Jesus, no dogs. Go on, shoot. Sorry. Yeah. So I was born in Townsville. My mother died when I was about a year old. So we moved in with my grandparents for a short while, and then Dad bought a block of land out at a satellite suburb called Alligator Creek, which is about half an hour away from the city. We had 5 acres there. He planted mango trees, and like a lot of people moved into that area at that time, built a shed, moved into the shed, and then built the house while living in the shed, as we all did. Yeah, so I still live in Alligator Creek now, different house, but I've lived out here since I was 3 or 4 years old. And yeah, so we're sort of out in the sticks, for want of a better word. We're in a rural residential area, so the house blocks range from an acre to 5 acres, 20 acres. There's a few bigger. The little subdivision I'm in is surrounded by a friend's cattle property, which is about, I think, 6,000 acres. So yeah, everything's a bit sort of tucked in against the foothills out here, and there's plenty of scrub and wildlife, and there's a national park about half a kilometre across the road, the boundary of it, which is several tens of thousand acres of scrub and bit of rainforest and stuff. And the Alligator Creek flows through the middle of it and through the middle of the suburb.
How many acres are you on now?
We've just got 1.5 acres.
And it's your wife and daughter and 4 dogs, I believe?
Yeah, 3 dogs. We lost one last year, but 3 dogs, a wife and a daughter, yes.
And I know I hear roosters and chickens back there. Well, chooks, I think.
Yeah, chooks. Yeah, we have 1 rooster and about 9 hens. But most people around the neighbourhood have assorted fowl. The neighbour beside us has, I think, white Sussex. She breeds white Sussex hens and roosters. She's also an apiarist. She's got about a dozen beehives there too. So yeah, there's plenty of noise in the area, whether it's from the animals or from the domestic animals. Yeah.
Well, let's back up a little bit, if I may. What happened to your mother?
She caught leukemia and died. Yeah.
Sorry to hear that. So growing up, were you what was the school system set up? How is that set up over there?
Right. Well, I started primary school in 1981, so it was grade 1. We had grade 1 through 7 was primary school, and then 8 through 12 is high school. We had a bus run that came past the house. So at about 7:30 every morning. We'd trot out to the front of Dad's place and wait under a tree for the bus to come past. The Townsville at that stage had lots of little bus companies, not one big sort of citywide company, and a local business had the contract. So we would either get picked up in an extremely luxurious, big long Denning, we called the AAT, because that was the name written on the side, which was a lovely big coach, or we had something from the 1950s Bedford type thing with windows that you had to slide, and all of the trim around the windows was so ancient that it was cracked, and most of the windows wouldn't slide, and so you were stuck on these hard vinyl cracked seats with absolutely no seatbelts as on the trip to school. So so we got picked up. We were sort of last or towards the end of the run, and we'd be on the bus from 7:30 through to maybe 8:30, and then in the afternoon left school at 3:00, jumped on the bus, and we were home by quarter to 4. The run home was always quicker. The bus would carry kids from every school on the way in and then disperse them, and then on the way home we were the last school to be picked up, so we just got picked up and then dropped off. So that
And
was
what did you occupy your time with in the afternoons after school?
well, having 5 acres of land and a mango orchard, we had plenty of time to do ride motorbikes, ride push bikes, climb the trees. Dad's place is only 200 metres from the banks of Alligator Creek, and I had a friend who lived up the road about half a k, and I would go up to his place a lot. We'd head down the creek, fish, swim, catch yabbies, build forts,
Catch
all
what?
that sort of rubbish, all the fun things.
What were you catching?
Yabbies, freshwater prawns, freshwater crayfish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was high school? Were you drawn into or excuse me, secondary school? How was were you drawn to anything academically growing up?
Not really. I mean, I didn't mind school. I was, quite bright. Apparently, I won a few awards for academic prowess. I was really good at maths, but didn't really apply myself too much in high school. And yeah, we had a lot of general sort of multi-strand science, which I quite liked. You had a bit of everything in the thing. My favourite class was something called Marine Studies, which every long period, which is a double period, at least once a week, we would take out about a dozen 10 and 12 foot aluminium dinghies with 8 horsepower motors and take them down the local boat ramp and motor up and down the creek and learn some boating skills. And on other lessons, we'd take cast nets down to the local creek and catch bait and catch small fish for the we had some resident fish in tanks in the classroom. We had a stonefish that was about a foot long, and sat in the bottom of the tank and did absolutely nothing until you threw in a couple of mullet, and then it would zoop up the mullet and then go back to absolute stillness for the rest of the day.
So marine studies sounds like a far more interesting course than anything that was available to me when I was in school. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, we did everything from a bit of learning about the ecosystem, the fish, and what through to the how to tie fish hooks on properly. The teacher had a nice big fiberglass boat, and when we did the school camps for the subject, he'd take his boat and we'd motor out to Hinchinbrook Island. I think we went up and just fish. It spent a lot of time fishing. It was Townsville is on the mouth of the Ross River, and like most of the cities over here, we're really close to the coast. There's not, so everybody, grows up fishing and playing in the water. So this was a really, really popular subject to get into. But yeah.
Any other pleasant memories from school?
Oh yeah, I used to play rugby union. Our school was primarily a rugby league school, but because being a public school, but there were a number of private schools in town, and they played rugby union because they were better than us, so they played union. However, we in grade 12 we coerced one of the PE teachers, who was a union man, that we needed to have a rugby union team. So he organised things with the other schools, and we ended up playing matches against the private schools, like the grammar school and cathedral, and we didn't do too bad. We won the odd match. We lost more than we won, but we were able to score points off the best school in town, who had gone undefeated for a year, and nobody had scored a try off them, and we did in our first game. I got knocked out in one match against Cathedral School. I remember going into a tackle and doing all the right things, turn, hold the ball up so that your teammates can get the ball and get it away. And that was the last thing I remember until I picked myself up off the ground about 30 metres away. And one of my teammates said, "Why did you let him do that?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "He just picked you up by the scruff of the neck and threw you out of the tackle." I said, "Well, there's not much I could do," because everything went black for a while. But yeah, that was a fairly memorable moment in school. Yeah.
That sounds pretty wild. Was there any university following secondary school?
Well, no. I went to agricultural college for my tertiary education. There is a big university here in Townsville, the James Cook University, JCU, who does a huge amount of stuff. But I insisted the fact that everyone was telling me that I was going to go to university because I was so clever, that I bucked and said, "Well, I'm not going to go to university then. That'll show you." So I went to the Burdekin Agricultural College and did 2 years there in an associate diploma of applied science course. And that was probably the 2 best years of my life. It was absolutely wonderful.
Tell me about that.
Well, we were in a little town called Clare, which is maybe 3/4 of an hour south of Townsville, and in between the next big town, which is Ayr, but out to the west. So sort of isolated a bit, but not too bad. And the college was on a massive property. We had, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of acres the college owned, but it was a big place. I was in the horticultural, agricultural side, so because there was also a beef, animal husbandry side. We grew our own sugarcane, harvested our own sugarcane, we drove the harvesters, we drove the haul-out tractors down to the siding and put the sugarcane bins on the trains. We did everything from ploughing and seeding and fertilising with tractors through to combine harvesters, where we headed our own sorghum and then baled lucerne. We had hundreds of acres under broccoli that we would pick in the mornings and ship off to market. We had a piggery, we had a dairy, we had a butchery, and everything was run by the students. So we had a obviously there was a few instructors, so we had an instructor that was dedicated to their little spot. So we had the butchery instructor was a butcher. He also moonlighted as the plant operator. So he also taught us to drive bulldozers and graders and forklifts and stuff. But yeah, every morning 2 students would get up at 4 a.m., get the little tractor and take it down to the dairy, and the cows would come up because they'd hear the tractor coming, and we'd milk out the cows, take the milk to the kitchen, and get ready for the day. And yeah, so a lot of the food that we ate was produced on farm. Yeah, but so we did everything. It was fun. We learnt welding, we learnt vehicle maintenance, small engine maintenance, engineering. Some classes did laser leveling with the massive big tractors to level paddocks out. So we were all 16, 17, 18. So it was a pretty, there's a lot of money under the direction of some very, very young people, but we're all there for the same purpose, really. We're all generally bushy kids or farm kids, or there were a few kids that got kicked out of the city because they were going down the wrong path, and this was as far away from Brisbane as their parents could get them. And they were some interesting folks. But we just spent a lot of time doing things and learning, whether it was, we stripped down Holden red motors and rebuilt them. We stripped down lawnmowers. We serviced the tractors. We serviced the bulldozers. We did, sort of everything. Yeah.
Any interesting or funny stories about the folks from Brisbane?
I had one bloke, one friend called Drugs. His name was, but he was on drugs. He tried to top himself in the first week we were there because it happened to be the anniversary of one of his friends' death. And woke up really early one morning with hearing a massive commotion. We all lived there were 3 dorms for the boys and a dorm for the girls. So I was on the top floor, down one end, close to the toilet and shower facilities, and heard absolutely ridiculous commotion coming out of the showers. And a few of us rushed out and found him under the hot water in an absolute state. He'd taken all of his. He was a epileptic, and he'd been saving up all of his Tegretol or whatever the drug he was on for several weeks, and then decided he was going to do himself in on the anniversary of his mate's death. So we were hanging over the shower stalls, throwing towels over the hot water coming out of the shower because it was on full hot water, while someone else scooted in underneath in order to turn the hot water off and open the door and get him out. But he survived and stayed on at college, and that was the first week. That was that was a fairly memorable experience. We had people. There was one bloke who called Swinger. He had an arm that didn't work properly. So it's probably not politically correct, but yeah, he had an arm that was dead, hung by his side. So he was called Swinger because it swung. And he was driving one of the haul-out trucks or tractors one day and took a corner too fast and rolled it. And tractor ended up on its side, and the cane bins ended up in the middle of the paddock, and that one of the other kids came racing back into the common room and announced, "It's tool time!" And we all knew what he was meant because we knew who was doing what. And so there was a roundup crew of instructors and students to organise a crane and go down there and flip the thing back up and check the tractor and put the cane back on and find a front end loader to pick up the sugar cane and put it back in the bins, and yeah, so a lot of those sort of things happen. Luckily, I didn't get myself damaged too much in any industrial things. I had a few alcohol related injuries, but yeah, it was a dry campus, which meant you really had to hide it well. But yeah, Friday, Saturday nights, the instructors did their last rounds by about 11 o'clock, made sure 11 o'clock and all was well, and then they went home. They lived on little houses on campus, but spread out over 20 acres of the main sort of campus ground. So there was a bit of certainly some little not so well lit areas that we could congregate and yeah, kick on the early weekend nights. Yeah, there was also a creek that ran past us called Bradda Creek, and a lot of students would just drive down the Braddas and with a case of beer from the local club and spend the weekend down there.
And of your alcohol related injuries, was that fighting or just stupidity?
Oh no, just absolute alcohol poisoning. Yeah, I'm not a fighter. Yeah, just too young, too much scotch, and yeah, fell asleep.
Passed out. Had you been a drinker before then? Had you been a drinker before?
Well, I've always drunk beer, from teenagers, but I'd never been a spirit drinker. My dad was never a spirit drinker, and neither was my granddad. So,
and you started with scotch? Beer.
So yeah, the first time I drank spirits properly, there was three of us. We had a bottle of Pepsi, a bottle of Stone's green ginger wine, and a bottle of 100 Pipers scotch, and we all just had our pannikins. Do you know what a pannikin is?
I do not.
Okay, a big enamel mug, so enamel coated steel mugs.
Okay.
And we would pour equal thirds into our pannikins and drink them, and in less than what seemed like very little time, everything was empty. Everything was really funny, and I couldn't walk properly. And that was early Friday night, early Saturday morning. And I was a bit sick, and then I went to bed, and then I woke up on Sunday afternoon with people telling me stories of how they did a roster to come in and check on me to make sure I was still breathing during the weekend. I ended up with several rounds of kitchen duty, because if you were on college and you missed a meal without telling them that you were going to be away, you got kitchen duty. So me sleeping through all the meals for 2 days straight, being passed out in my bed, I accumulated about a week's worth of washing pots and pans and stuff.
Are there any more school stories to share before we move on?
Oh, probably a heap, but yeah. No, I might save some for another day.
Sure. Let me ask a question I meant to ask. Did it came to mind when you were talking about waiting for the bus rather. When did your association with animal handling begin?
Well, we've always had animals. We had a farm, so mostly mangoes, but we had a flock of goats. We always had chickens. We always had geese, savage, bloody creatures they are, the geese, and dogs. So animals, you grow up around them, you get used to them. Dad used to, and we had snakes. Dad used to dispatch of the snakes generally with a shovel, which is not so environmentally friendly. But as he got older, he didn't like killing as many things, and being ex-army, he sort of got over killing things a bit. So he learnt how to just catch them and move them out of the road. Only ever, if the snakes came up around the house, the little chihuahuas that he had would would go off and bail them up, run around in circles around the snake, and he'd deal with it. But he showed me how to do it, and so once you do it a few times, you sort of get, once you get the adrenaline under control and you can do things nice, I just started doing it, and never ever went out of my way to hunt down snakes. But once people hear that you can do it, then suddenly you end up getting phone calls from somebody who heard that you were okay, that you caught a snake for them, and could you come and move one out of their house and that sort of thing. So it's sort of just a bit organic, and just people ring up and that. So I've done a couple of snake handling courses as well. Done the right thing, did one with national parks and with another reptile handling mob in town, and you pick up brown snakes, and which are our deadliest snake, the eastern brown, and catch goannas and things. I don't like catching goannas because they're very, very scratchy. They got big claws, very, very big claws. To the school, to work, and I was just a farmhand there. So I drove tractors, rolled up fluming, rolled out fluming, slashed, rolled up more fluming, rolled out more fluming, and
What's fluming?
Fluming is it's a big, lay flat, thin irrigation plastic pipe. Essentially, it's not much thicker than a thick plastic bag, like a really thick plastic bag. And when it's fully engorged with water, it's maybe a foot through, and you'd roll all the cane fields planted in lines, in furrows. So you'd roll the fluming out along the headland, and there would be a hole in line with each drainage ditch between the furrows, and you'd put a little black plastic cup called the fluming cup in each one, and you'd cut the end off them. They were little graduated sections. So if you wanted to put a lot of water on the paddock, you put the big open one in there. If you wanted to put a little bit of water on the paddock, you put a small one in there. And depending on the length of the paddock, you change the cup sizes around. So you'd roll it up once you'd watered the paddock, you'd roll it all up, and they'd pack up on a little cable type reel, and hundreds and hundreds of meters of fluming. You might end up with maybe something about the size of a couple of 44-gallon drums stacked together, and then you just pick that up on the tractor and take it to the next paddock and unroll it for the next round of irrigation. So all the cane in our area is irrigated. North Townsville, in the wet tropics area, it's generally they call dry land irrigation. Rains enough up there that they don't need to irrigate, whereas down here in the dry tropics, we need to put water on things.
Where did your career take you after that?
Well, I lived there. I worked there for a bit over a year, and figured out that the boss, having three sons that two were older than me and one was younger, and so I was only ever going to be the general dog's body farmhand, and there's no career advancement really available there. And after a year of getting told 3 different orders from 3 different people in the same day, and only being able to accomplish 1 or 2 of them, it got a little bit not fun. So I looked further afield for some work. Ended up applying at the local TAFE college for a trade cookery, and ended up doing that for a bit, and then took a job in a local service station as a cook. So.
And where along the line did you meet your wife? Was that still later?
Yeah, still later. It's sort of, yeah. So I cooked for about 18 months, 2 years at the service station, during which time my grandfather passed away. He'd been, well, both, my grandmother passed away while I was at agricultural college, and my grandfather passed away a few years later. But my grandmother had a stroke, and was in the kitchen while she had a stroke and collapsed, and he, out of instinct, caught her, and then damaged his back greatly, as he was 90 when he caught her. She was 89, and so the last few years of his life, my sister and I, spent a lot of time keeping his health up, looking after him, until he passed. He passed while I was working at the service station. Yeah, so I worked there for a couple of years, and decided that hey, Jenna, that's enough. I wanted to go overseas, like most Australians, get the urge to go overseas to Europe and have a look around, and having, hey,
They're fine.
having
I can still, I hear you loud and clear.
yeah, having a British parent, and I had 2 aunts and half 4 cousins in England, so I made, we'd always kept contact with them, and so I said, I'm coming over to England. So I went over to England for a year, and lived with both sets of aunts and uncles and cousins during the time. I didn't advance my career too much while I was over there. I worked as a night shelf stacker at a local supermarket, and which funded my little trips and my snooker playing and beer drinking and kebab eating, which is what we spent a lot of time doing. I came back from England quite a lot heavier than when I went over. I was on good pasture. And when I came back from England, I joined a local theatre group, with my father. He's always been active in the community in 1,000 different groups and associations, and one of them was the Outback Players, which was our local amateur theatre group. And after spending a year overseas, I hadn't seen him, so I thought, he seems to be spending all this time at these plays, I better join up, and so I can see him. So I joined up and happened to meet a girl there who was also in the group, and we acted in a what I call it, theatre restaurant, together, and hit it off. And I moved in, and we got married several months later, and that was it'll be 22 years in a couple of months' time.
Well, where did your career take you? And I know you eventually had a daughter.
Yes, I'll have a son and a
Okay.
daughter. So we got pigeon pair. No worries. Yeah, so my son turns 21 in a couple of weeks' time, and he lives on campus at the local university. He's doing a Bachelor of Computer Science. So, and he doesn't have a car or a license or the desire to get a license. So, and we don't have the desire to drive him an hour or so every day in and out of university. So he got a dorm room there, and he lives in uni. So it's only the 3 of us home. Daughter actually works at the servo in the kitchen that I used to work in. She graduated from school a year or so ago. They finish in we finished high school November, or end of the year is end of November, very early December. High schools finish a little bit earlier than the primary schools or the later grades. She's been working at the local service station for the past 6 months, but she's got a car, so but she's not looking at moving out anytime soon either. So we're getting to the age of being empty nesters, but apparently the nest is far too comfortable. So yeah, I can't see us evolving past that. It's raining again.
That's a bit of a catch-22, I guess. Yeah, you want them there, but I can see anybody wanting some freedom later in the later years. But what is what occupies your days now? What are you up to?
Well, I'll give you a quick run through. Once I came back from England, met my wife, I was still working as a cook at the service station, and evolved to work on the front petrol selling side of things. Changed jobs to a different site, became a manager, managed service stations until 2008, 2009. And then I got really crook. I picked up a mosquito-borne virus called Barmer Forest, which is same sort of thing as Ross River virus, dengue fever, that sort of thing. Really knocked me about. So it took me about 6-8 months to sort of clear it from my system. And by that stage, I was overworking in service stations. So I took a job and it was the best job of my life. It only went for a year, but I worked at a local brewery. There was a brew by you, which was essentially people walked in and made beer there, and I was the brewer, so I helped them through the procedure, and then we looked after it and fermented it out and bottled it up for them, and they would come along and take it away several weeks later when it was ready. And I did that for a year, and that was the absolute best job I've ever had, because my entire day was taken up with making beer and talking to people about making beer.
Yeah.
And unlike all the customers in the service stations who are there because they have to buy fuel, they call it a grudge buy. You've got to be in there because you've got to get fuel. Whereas if you're walking into some place to make beer, you're there because you want to make beer. You like beer, and so you're a happy person in a happy place. So I had the best customers and the best job for about a year, until the business got sold, and it actually closed, and the person that bought the business stripped out all the machinery and sold it off, because it was they wanted to start another one further down south, and buying this business and the second-hand machinery was cheaper than buying the machinery brand new. So it closed. I worked for a year or so for a migrant support group that helped the UNHCR, the Human Rights Organization, to relocate refugees. So I worked there for about a year, 18 months, doing. My department was called the basic household goods. So I would go around town buying second-hand sofas and beds and tables and stuff. So when the refugees landed in Townsville, somebody would find them a home to rent, and I would fill it up with all of their requirements for the household goods, and someone else would enroll their kids in school and that sort of thing. So I did that for about 18 months, and then there's a government change to policy, and they released quite a lot of single blokes from one of the offshore detention centres. And so for the next year or so, a lot of the migrant resource people were relocating single men and they generally locate them in the major cities rather than in the regional areas where families went to. So work dropped off, and we'd had a cyclone come through. Yeah, Cyclone Yasi, which was a Category 5 when it crossed the coast up the road from us, and the winds we got here in Townsville were still sort of Category 2. So the trees blowing around. We had no electricity for 9 days where we are. Some places were worse. I think there were places that were out of power for months. So during that time, I spent a lot of time, if I had spare time, chopping up trees for people and clearing stuff. And then when the work dropped off in town, I just sort of said, well, I could just start my own business doing the sort of vegetation management out here. And so for the last 10 years or so, I've been mowing lawns and brush cutting and spraying chemicals on trees and chopping down things and chopping up things and all the fun things. So yeah, that's what I've been. Yeah, that's where I am now. So if it wasn't raining, I'd be out mowing. But we had 5 inches of rain on Saturday night, and we've had about another inch last night, and we had a huge amount the other day. I think I told you we had about 20 inches over 4 or 5 days 2 weeks ago. So everything's very green and very wet at the moment. So lawn mowers get very bogged. So I just stay doing nothing, essentially listening to podcasts about people on riverboats until everything dries up enough for me to get it back out and mow. And it'll be full steam ahead until the next lot of rain.
Yeah. Glad I could fill your time. I'm a little jealous, though. You work for yourself and you're in a hammock on a Monday afternoon. On your porch in the rain.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of a limit. A couple of years ago, Townsville had a big flood. We had some places had about 2 meters of rain in about 2 weeks. So our major river, the Ross River, flooded. People's houses went underwater, and it's essentially I sat in the hammock for 2 weeks watching the rain, and we got anywhere between 4 and 6 inches of rain a day every day for about 2 weeks straight. And I just sat in my hammock and watched and listened to podcasts. So it's a sort of my default position now. It's like, oh, it's raining, I'm gonna go downstairs, sit in the hammock, and chill. So yeah.
It sounds pretty lovely. Does your wife work?
Oh yes, she's my wife works for a non-government natural resource management organisation. She's an environmental scientist.
Okay.
So they do land management plans and things for farms and businesses. She's got projects for revegetation of native habitat. She was working on the black-throat finch project until last year, which is helping farmers assist one of the endangered birds around here by modifying some of their farming practices to make it better for the birds. Planting species of grasses that have smaller seeds because they're finches and they can't eat really big seeds. And there's a government grants to help them fence off paddocks to stop erosion, and there's those sort of things. There's sort of an intermediary organisation that allows farmers to get $20,000-$30,000 worth of work done, as long as it meets the sort of environmental requirements that the grant money's there. So she's worked for them for 10 or 11 years. So she's works in an office. So if it rains, she has to still go to work. Although she does do field visits to some of her sites, because one of her projects at the moment is beach scrub, which sounds as it is. It's the scrubby little trees and stuff that live just up from the beach, like within 50 meters of the high tide mark. So
Right.
some of her project sites are a couple of 100 kilometers away. She'll go down camp for a couple of days in the bush, do vegetation analysis and check for weeds and biodiversity type conditions, etc. Come back, write reports, and yeah.
How old did you say your daughter is?
My daughter is just turned 19. Turned 19, yeah, only a couple of days ago.
And is she drawn to anything academically, or is her career path known yet?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if career path. She's working in the kitchen, but she did really well in her catering and hospitality courses at school. She's also a very talented author. She's been writing creative writing stories and books since she was in primary school. She would write, she'd make up fictional characters and write about them, or draw pictures of characters and act out scenes and make little plays, and very creative bent to her mind. Yeah. So she's written quite a few. I think they publish on some of the fan fiction type sites, and there's one other that I can't remember, but it's had the book's had 10 or 20,000 views over the thing, but it's a non-profit thing. So they just write it, and if people like it, they read it and comment on it, and if they don't read it, I suppose. But she likes that. But she's also spends a lot of time cuddling her dog, my grand dog. Apparently, that's our only grandchildren we're getting. They're fur babies. So yeah,
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
no.
Is she attending university?
No, she's just working full time.
Does she intend to go to college?
She's against the idea, but see how she goes in a couple of years. If she wants to go, she can go. If she got good enough grades to get into different courses, but she's never really been wanting to have had any desperate need to go to university. So she's happy now working, and she's just got to sit her driver's license test to get a license. She's done all the preliminary stuff, and then she can get out and kick with friends who all live in town. So and none of them have cars. So when she's got a car, so she just needs to get a license, and she can go and have fun and do teenage girl things in town. So,
what are the laws in Australia for driving?
Right. Well, you can get your learner's permit for driving when you're 16-ish. They change it and modify it every couple of years. It used to be 16 and a half, and now I think it's 16. You get a logbook. You can either like an online app one or an actual physical book. And once you've done 100 hours of sort of driving under instruction with someone who's got an open license, then you can sit your practical test. You have to do when you get your logbook, you do a theoretical test. So you're learning the road rules and what the signs look like, the basic stuff. And once you've got that, you can drive in a car with someone with an open license. And you've got to stick big yellow L for learners stickers on the front of your car and back of your car, so that other drivers know to give you some space, and that you may be stopping in undesirable pits because you don't know how to drive yet. But then they graduate up once they've passed their practical test. They have a big P on their car, and then after a certain amount of time, they graduate to a green P, and then after that, they're on their opens, and you don't need to announce how good a driver you are. I think we probably have a similar alcohol policy on the roads as over there. Learners and young drivers are not allowed to have their 0.00. Truck drivers are 0.00. You can be under 0.05 is the legal limit for open drivers. There's I think under 0.02 or something for some of the older intermediary stuff, but generally, if you've had more than 3 beers in an hour, you're going to be over the limit, so you don't drive.
I think we're at 0.08 over here.
Oh, okay, right.
So anyway, all right. So switching to a final topic here. There's a video you sent me handling a snake, and
yes,
you said to, I assume to your wife that the receiver, in this case me, had a phobia of snakes. Allow me to set the record straight. I don't have a phobia of snakes, but I don't see myself moving a 6 to 8 foot snake. How frequent does that happen to you?
Well, on Wednesday, I moved one bigger than the one that I sent you out of a friend's yard. Got home, checked my messages to find a neighbour on the other end also had a snake in their house. So at different times of the year, it's it can be relatively regular. I try not to advertise that I do it because I don't have my permits run out. I don't have a permit at the moment, so just have to get my first aid certificate and apply. It's a free permit from the government. It's a damage mitigation permit they call it. So, but I've over the years I've moved quite a lot. But I've been a volunteer in my local rural fire brigade for about 27 years. So I have been known in the area as someone who doesn't mind helping people. So if people get stuck with any odd things, I generally get a phone call saying, "Oh, you seem to be pretty handy. Could you give us a hand with X, Y, Z?" Yeah, so it's just how it happens.
How big was the snake last Wednesday?
Oh, it was in excess of 8 foot too, at least.
Are they all pythons?
Most of the ones that people see are the big pythons that are around the house. Generally, because sometimes people see them in their chook pens with a big bulge in the middle. Sometimes, like this one was just cruising on the veranda railing on someone's house. They looked out and saw it. A lot of the snakes that get into the houses tend to be little tree snakes or pythons. I've rarely had to move anything considered dangerous. You see a lot of them. You know, we have a local black whip snake that lives somewhere around our house, and every few weeks the dogs go off their nut, and you look out the window and there's this black whip snake doing its thing, zipping through the garden and doing its little lap of the area, but it doesn't get in with the dogs, and the dogs can't get to it. So there's no reason to move it or to interfere with it. We just generally take some pictures and sing out. If the daughter's home, I'll call out there's a snake, and she'll come out and have a look at it, and watch it do its thing, and that. We've had snakes in the house knocking things off the kitchen sink. We've had snakes in the house knocking books and trinkets off bookshelves, and so they're just we're tucked away in against the scrub, so the boundary between nature and the house is pretty close, and sometimes a bit permeable, I suppose. So yes.
Have you lost any chickens or any wildlife to these snakes?
Oh yeah, yes. We had ducks one year, and several ducks and a couple of drakes. So we had ducklings everywhere, and one particular time we noticed that we would oh, we're a few ducklings short. You count them up and you're 7 ducklings are missing. That's no good. And then, you look around, check the fences and check under the chicken house boxes and make sure there's no snakes in there. And, a bit of something got in and eaten them. The kookaburras, if the kookaburras can get into the chicken pen, they'll eat young chicks and ducklings. And we've got quolls around here too, which are like carnivorous little possums. And so there's lots of things around that can eat small animals. But losing 7 in a hit was a bit odd. And then about a week later, we lost another 7. And about a week later, we lost another 7. And we thought, okay, this is getting beyond a joke because we've gone from 30 ducklings to a handful of ducklings. And happened to go down to the chook shed on a time that we weren't normally going down there, and noticed that one of the hollow sections of steel that the shed was actually made out of was a large python coming out ready for his weekly meal of our ducklings. That one was, I think, only about 7 foot long. We measured him, and then we moved him further off down the road where other people have chickens and they're not going to eat ours. But yeah, you lose animals to snakes and wildlife out here. My wife told us a story when she hadn't long moved into this house. Her ducks were roaming the yard, and a wedge-tail eagle, juvenile wedge-tail eagle, luckily enough, swooped down and landed on one of her young drakes and was starting to rip and defeather it when she went charging out in her underclothes and thongs, throwing sticks and swearing at it. And the eagle took off, but the duck survived, or the drake survived. But yeah, it's not uncommon. We get dingoes in the area as well. The native dogs. People lose chickens and sometimes dogs, smaller dogs to them pretty regularly in the area. Our yard's fenced quite well. They keep our dogs in, so it tends to keep other dogs out. And the smell of having 3 big dogs around, I suppose, makes the dingoes not really want to come into our yard. So we're pretty safe. But down the road, across the paddock, they'll be roaming through the middle of the paddock early mornings within maybe 50 yards of our house. And they'll sit there and have a howl and sing, and then you'll hear other ones from the other foothills singing, and suddenly the whole valley is going up in dingo sing-song. And most of the dogs generally then go back inside and sit quietly till it's over, because it can be a bit freaky echoing around the hills. But yeah.
Any other interesting little stories about living over there that us in the U.S. may not have any idea about?
Oh, well, I was in the local fire brigade still am in, but been in there for getting on 30 years, and we've had quite a few bushfires and things. But one of the I can tell you a story that's happened a couple of times, because it happens to be in the same spot. One of the roads here, as our roads are, there was a grader went through to mark out the roads originally, and then they came through with some bitumen and rock and bitumen over the graded roads when the suburb first started 40 odd years ago. And there's been very little maintenance of the road edge since, and so road edge builds up, and when it rains, as it rains as it is now, a lot of the places the road doesn't drain off and actually drains into the road. And there's a section of road about 1 kilometre from my house that's had to be rebuilt several times, because people will drive along and then just get bogged in the middle. The bitumen gives way, and because of all the moisture that's been on the road from the rain, the under soil turns to slop. And we've had 4-wheel drives bogged there. We've had a bus bogged there. We've had a council water truck drive along looking for potholes and went over this thing and just sunk down to its axles. We've had to get Yes, had to get a tow trucks and cranes and things to lift cars out of the road, like in the center of the road. You drive along and then the whole thing just sinks down to nothing.
Well, Alex, that does wrap up all my questions here. I do appreciate you you doing this.
No problem at all.
We'll keep
There'll
in
be a
touch.
chance to sit down in the hammock for another hour.
Yes, sir. We'll keep in touch.
Okay, shall do, mate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good one.
You too.
Okay. See ya.
He's got a phobia. Oh, shit.
I realized I did skip a question. Well,